Welcome to part 2 of my 2023 Crossing Newfoundland by ATV series. In part 1, you saw us ride from Port aux Basques to Stephenville, with stops at the Tabletop Mountain and Black Banks Beach. The next day, we had a rain-filled ride from Stephenville to Corner Brook with a stop at Serpentine Lake. In today's video, you'll see us ride from Corner Brook to Lomond, with a few scenic stops at Old Man's Pond, Goose Arm, and the famous Lomond Sinkhole before we arrive at the Lomond Lodge for the night. Day 4. Corner Brook to Lomond. Staying in a hotel with a restaurant is convenient as it saves time getting ready in the morning before hitting the trail. After breakfast, we loaded our gear and I reviewed the maps to plot the best route out of Corner Brook. The weather was pretty much perfect for ATVing. Overcast, so it doesn't get too hot or dusty, and all the rain from the day before would ensure we wouldn't get baked in dust. The tonneau cover lets dust in the cargo area a little bit, but it keeps the water out. If you have a polycarbonate windshield, be sure to bring something safe to clean it with. I also periodically put Rain-X on it to help make sure the water beads off. I can't believe how much gear Wynn and Dale managed to cram onto the back of that X3, and they got really good throughout the week of taking it off and putting it back on in no time. Josh's Honda Pioneer becomes a serious pack mule later in the week.
Alright, boys, you ready for the pain? The pain in the rain?
Ready for the rain? We're going to be ready for the rain today.
Yeah, exactly.
After we left the hotel, but before we get on the trail, we decided to stop at McDonald's, which was about 200 meters up the road, and it was great. We could just go through the drive-thru. We bought some coffees that we could put in our Yeti mugs to take with us. Typically when we stay in Corner Brook, we stay at the Greenwood Inn and Suites because it's right on the middle of the legal route where you're allowed to drive ATVs and side-by-sides through town, so you can get from one end of town to the other to get from the trailheads. It's a very unique experience being able to drive on the city streets to be able to get from one end of the town to the other. The legal route ends at the city line, so when you cross the Gallon Bridge, you still have a 5-kilometer stretch of road until you get back to the trailhead. There's a trail now that runs the ditch alongside the road. The speed limits on that road are between 50 and 80 kilometers an hour, which is 30 and 50 miles per hour. And once you get on that trail that's in Hughes Brooks, it's only 15 kilometers until you get to Old Man's Pond, which is beautiful. And as you can see here, the trail condition is fantastic. I mean, really, it's a dirt road at this point through a lot of the areas up here in this mountain, and it's beautiful. And as nice as this might look in video, you just have to see it in person. If you have access to watch this on a big screen TV, it looks far nicer watching it on your TV than it does on your computer screen.
I've enjoyed your videos. Oh, thank you.
Shortly after we arrived at Cloudy Pond, two gentlemen showed up on a couple of ATVs. We chatted with them for a while and found out they were also doing a similar trip to ours. It turns out they were fans of my Crossing Newfoundland by ATV videos, and they were following one of the trips I have listed on my website. I'm happy to know so many people have done this trip because my videos motivated them to do it, and my website helped them plan their trip. In fact, I also answer hundreds of questions a year from people planning trips through my Facebook page and emails. I enjoyed this trip so much the first time I did it, I decided to put what I knew online so other people could hopefully benefit from it too. I remember how frustrating it was when I was planning my first few trips and I couldn't find anything online. Our next stop after Cloudy Pond was Goose Arm, and that's only 6 kilometers away, which is about 4 miles away. Not far at all, and again, it's another place you have to see in person. When you leave Goose Arm, you can either backtrack the way you came down the main road, or you can drive 300 meters down the beach, and then at that point you'll see a path up on your right-hand side that goes up over a hill, takes you through a nice trail through the woods. You don't have to do it, but it's just something nice to get you off the main road for a bit. After leaving Goose Arm, we ventured northward towards Lomond, riding through the picturesque rolling hills. A lumber company's clear cutting left a lot of this area pretty stark only just a few years ago. It's quite a transformation in such a short time. It just goes to show you how resilient nature is if you look around and see how lush this is now.
I like that one if you pack it in back there. So much garbage. You don't see much garbage around here.
I put an EastCoastATV sticker on the wall of the warm-up shelter where we stayed for a few minutes before heading to the Lomond Sinkhole, which is not far from the shelter. Here's the shelter on the map. and the sinkhole's only about 10 kilometers or 6 miles away. And then about another 5 kilometers or 3 miles is the Lomond River Lodge, where we spent the night. If you're not familiar with the sinkhole, it was formed when a large underground cave collapsed. It's become quite a popular destination for snowmobilers and off-roaders both. It's about 150 feet to the bottom and roughly 150 feet wide at the top. A brook flows off the top nearly 100 feet to the bottom where it disappears in the rocks below. There's also a steep path to the bottom and ropes to guide you down if you're adventurous. Like I've mentioned before, and you can see from this angle that it's very steep going down there, so hold on to the rope and take your time going down. If you're able to, I highly suggest going down. It's totally worth it when you get to the bottom.
I don't think I've ever seen any more water than that.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen more water than that before either.
I haven't been here the same time as you, but...
It was around 4:30 when we arrived at the sinkhole, and it was July, so the sun is up until after 9, so we had a lot of light. But if you were to do this trip in September, like we often do, the sun is quite low in the sky at that time of day. If it's too dark for you to see the sinkhole when you arrive, don't worry about it. You can see it first thing the next morning if you happen to spend the night at the Lomond River Lodge.
Gotcha.
I can hear them. Can you hear me? Like, no, I can hear, you hear? Oh, they can hear me too. Check. Yeah, I can hear you.
Sometimes getting Bluetooth headsets to connect to everyone is like putting a puzzle together. We all have different models of Sena Bluetooth headsets in our helmets so that we can talk to each other while we're driving. We usually limit our groups to about 4 people so it doesn't get too confusing. If you haven't tried riding with some kind of communication system, I highly recommend it. It really changes the dynamic of the ride for the better. The last 5 kilometers of the ride towards Lomond Lodge is easy going. We arrived around 6 p.m., which gave us lots of time to clean up, make dinner, and enjoy the evening. The cabins are well appointed and they have a few washers and dryers on the grounds if you need to wash some clothes. They even have a hall you can use, which makes it easy to get a large group of people together in one common place. It was a pretty low-key Sunday night, and they kept the hall open for us so we could play a couple of card games even. Here's a quick recap of what we did that day. We left Corner Brook at around 10 to 11 in the morning, and then we arrived at about 5 after 6 at Lomond River Lodge for a total driving distance of 102 kilometers or 63 miles and a total driving time of 7 hours and 5 minutes. Our average moving speed was about 22 miles per hour or 35 kilometers an hour. Our maximum elevation was 1,213 feet, and we climbed 6,500 feet, and we had a total descent of over 6,800 feet. Day 5. Lomond to Howley. It rained a bit overnight, but it cleared up by morning, which was great. A little rain at night is just what you want to keep the dust down.
Looking good, Tony. Looking good.
Just a little brekkie.
Tony loves to cook, and those familiar with past Newfoundland videos knows he's really good at it. Lomond Lodge has a restaurant if you don't want to cook for yourself. On most of our trips, we like to spend 2 nights at some places so we can relax, recharge our batteries if you will. Where we end up staying an extra day depends on whatever route we take that year. Lomond Lodge will be a good spot to spend a rest day if you're planning on doing something like that yourself. That would be the 5-minute warning. Today you're going to see us leave Lomond Lodge and drive south all the way down to Deer Lake, and then we're going to continue on all the way over to Howley, and we're going to spend the night camping on a beautiful beach there. If you're into camping, I highly recommend staying at this spot. You definitely won't regret it. You may have noticed on the map that the incredible Grossmoor National Park is just outside of Lomond. Since it's a national park, you're not permitted to drive ATVs or side-by-sides in there though. But if you're interested in seeing the park, you're in luck. You can rent cars at the Deer Lake International Airport and leave your ATVs there in the secure parking area. Then you can go explore Grossmoor for a few days, like we did in part 5 of our 2019 trip. I'll leave a link in the video description below in case you want to watch it. This trail was only intended to be a temporary fix for a flooded road near Bottomless Pond. The floodwaters never receded enough for the road to be passable, so now this is permanent. It can be muddy at times, especially after heavy rain, but we've never been stuck on it, but I have heard of a few people who have been. If you have good tires, you'll probably have no problem getting through here. I put it in four-wheel drive here just to be on the safe side. It was probably nothing, and it turns out it was. But you never know, I've driven through puddles before, sometimes that all of a sudden they get really deep in the center unexpectedly. It was just muddy enough and soft enough that if you hit the gas a little too hard, you might cover the guy behind you with a bit of mud. Not that I've ever done that before. We came out to Bottomless Pond, which is the one I told you about earlier that flooded, and here you can see from a few years ago somebody's cottage or camp was underwater. It was just crazy flooding that never went away, and to my knowledge nobody ever figured out what caused it. We got back on the trail towards Deer Lake, and the trail's in great shape, and we came across this huge beaver dam. We've actually seen ones bigger than that along the trail, so that's a lot of water, and if they let go, like one does later in this trip, you'll see what happens to the trail. And one of the nice things about Deer Lake, just like Stephenville and Corner Brook and Port aux Basques, they allow ATVs on roads there, so it's fantastic that they let you do this. I wish Nova Scotia would let people do this stuff too. In case you're wondering about the rules for ATVs on Deer Lake roads, you're allowed to drive on the roads between May 15th and November 30th between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. You have to have a valid driver's license, and your machine has to be registered and insured. You can drive up to 40 kilometers an hour on the designated route. And if you must drive a short distance off the designated route for some reason, don't go any faster than 20 kilometers an hour. After topping up the tanks, we stopped at the Foodland grocery store and ensured that we had enough supplies to camp for the night. Then, of course, Tim Hortons for coffee. The trailway runs parallel to Main Street in Deer Lake, so it's pretty easy to follow on your way in or out of town. We had beautiful blue skies and sunshine, which was perfect weather for our planned night of camping under the stars in Howley. About 15 kilometers east of Deer Lake is the main dam. It'll be 100 years old next year, and when it was created, it was the largest hydroelectric dam of its kind in the entire world. It's a great spot to stop and take some photos if you haven't seen it before. After leaving the dam and you head eastward towards Howley, you'll know you're very close when you start to see the beautiful sandy beaches along the side of the trailway. I've done many variations of this trip over the years, and I still love going. I know many people that have done this trip numerous times. It truly is the ATV trip of a lifetime, and if you're planning on doing this trip, make sure you keep in mind that you'll probably want to go back multiple times. Oh yeah, this is the spot for the night. Lots of room to set up all of our tents and gear. The only reason we ever first camped here was because we just kind of saw it from the railbed, and we got off and started exploring around the sand, and we said, you know what, this would be a great place to camp, so the next year we did. Dwayne was the first one to pick out his spot.
Sand out of it, good.
Alright, and then do the same to the other side.
It was ridiculously hot when we were setting the tents up in direct sunlight. It was about 90 degrees or more. It was cooler when we left Lomond Lodge that morning, so most of us still had warmer clothes on. Once Dwayne got his tent set up, everybody came over and started checking it out. What a cool setup. I love it. And a couple of people came by and checked out our campsite. They didn't stop though, they didn't say hello, but they seemed friendly enough. It wasn't very long before people got their bathing suits on and decided to try out the water because it was so hot.
How's the water? It's good, man.
I think I might just sleep in here tonight.
I'm getting used to it now.
The water was pretty cold when you first got in, but you get used to it pretty quick. Even if you're not camping while you're doing this trip, it's worth your while to stop in here and relax for a bit and just enjoy the scenery. A local couple showed up and visited with us for a bit and brought their fishing rod with them. Non-residents are allowed to fish in Newfoundland. You have to get a non-resident license, and you have to have a guide if you're going to fish at a lake. You can fish, though, if you're a non-resident at a stream or a river that's in sight of a road.
Yeah, you got two. Yeah, he got two. You got a measure. Yeah, he got two. Jesus Christ.
Oh, come on! Okay, no more of that.
The boys were getting pretty competitive with their bocce ball.
This is awesome. Come on. This game's like... Yeah, I know. Just look around, right? Yeah.
If you can't find Tony, he's probably behind the barbecue or a stove somewhere, and we're glad that he likes it because no one goes hungry on these trips. One of the nice things about driving side-by-sides instead of ATVs on a trip like this is it just makes it easier because you have a lot more room to bring extra gear so that you can do stuff like this.
Need me a potato, sir.
Yeah, yeah, they're all potatoes. Those ones.
Someone in Howley was lighting off fireworks, so we got to enjoy the show right from the beach. And yes, you were probably wondering the flies were pretty bad. But the good thing is they usually go away after dark, especially if you have a fire. So make sure you come prepared with lots of fly dope.
Look up headlight.
I've never seen that before.
Really?
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Second one that you poured for yourself.
Here's a quick recap of what we did that day. We left Lomond Lodge at 10:30 in the morning, and we arrived in Howley at 3 p.m. We only drove a total of 77 kilometers or 48 miles, and it took us 4 hours and 30 minutes with an average moving speed of 30 kilometers an hour or 18 miles an hour. Our maximum elevation was 1,192 feet. We climbed 2,671 feet, and we descended 2,610 feet. Day 6. Howley to Cloudy Pond. Deer Lake. We had a great night on the beach in Howley, and we can't wait to go there again. If you like camping, I highly recommend this spot. You'll absolutely love it. A tip for new people, bring earplugs or noise cancellation headphones like we do. Sometimes the wildlife can be a bit loud at night, believe it or not. And with earplugs, you won't hear a thing. Whether we're camping or not, we always take our garbage with us. We usually don't have to drive far before we come across a place where we can dispose of it properly. We even pick up garbage left behind by others if we find any, but I'm happy to say we hardly ever find any in Newfoundland. Our first stop was the Howley Shopping Center for a day's supply of water and snacks. It's only a few kilometers from the beach. Then we were off to our next major stop, the Gaff Topsail. The trail from Howley to the Gaff definitely needs some work. Brush has grown up quite high in many sections, and some of it's so bad you feel like you're driving through a brush tunnel. It's also a bit rough in sections, so just take your time. When you're riding the trailway, it's easy to miss the trail to the top of the Gaff Topsail if you're not paying attention. If you want to drive to the top, it's about 1 kilometer. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's a bit rough and it takes a bit of skill to navigate it, so if you're a true beginner, you may want to walk it instead. While you're riding up the trail to the top of the Gaff, you'll be treated to some nice views as the path isn't completely lined with tall trees.
I I just stalled.
Unfortunately, that stalling problem returned and it stalled a few more times before I get to the top. Luckily though, the machine started up again right away as soon as I started it, but it would become a bigger problem later this afternoon. At the base of the gaff there's no cell signal, but you'll have full bars at the top, which is convenient, so you'll be able to make phone calls and you'll be able to send photos out if you want. A few minutes after I get to the top, I get a phone call from VOCM Radio in St. John's. They interviewed me about our Newfoundland ATV trips, which I thought was pretty nice of them.
Hello. It's going very well, thank you. We just got to the top of the Gaff Topsail.
This trip, we do it pretty much every year. We're doing a West Coast trip this year. Sometimes we go across the entire island, from Argentia to Port aux Basques. This year we're going from Port aux Basques as far as the Gaff as today, and then we're going to backtrack.
Why do this, Patrick?
The scenery and the people, and there's nothing like this that we can do back home too. The rail bed is such a fantastic resource where it joins all the different communities across Newfoundland. There's a lot of ATVing in Nova Scotia as well where I live, but a lot of the trail systems are disconnected and you can't get through around the province. So we come here and people are very welcoming. They're so friendly, and a lot of the businesses seem to appreciate ATVers quite a bit, and a lot of the communities like Brook and Deer Lake and Stephenville and other places allow ATVs to ride through the roads so they can get to gas stations and hotels and things like that. And that makes planning this trip way easier.
That was a small portion of the interview. Thank you VOCM for reaching out to me. It was a pleasure. How can you not enjoy a view like this? You may be wondering if it's always windy, and the answer is yes. Only one time in all the times I've been to the Gaff Topsail has it not been windy. Depending on what time of the day you get to the Gaff, this is a great place to have lunch or supper. We ran into a father and daughter team that were crossing the island, and they were following my website and videos as their guide.
See ya!
Shortly after we got back on the trail, we had to stop for a minute for a grouse and her baby chicks that were on the trail. They must have been living somewhere in the brush. I made it down the mountain okay, but then after about 10 or 15 minutes, my engine started acting up. The check engine light was coming on, the RPMs would surge, they would go really fast, and then it would stop and slow down to about 10 or 15 kilometers an hour, and it repeatedly did that over and over again. It turns out it was the fuel pump that was causing the problem all along, but at the time we didn't know what it was. I made it back to Howley, we changed out the spark plugs, and we checked a lot of other things that we thought could possibly be the problem. We put it back together, and I managed to drive it back to Deer Lake, where I had the machine picked up and shipped to the Can-Am dealer in Brook. Normally the ride from Howley to Deer Lake doesn't take long, but because of my fuel pump, it took a little longer than normal. At least I made it under my own power. We were supposed to go to the always awesome Cloudy Pond that night, but because of the breakdown, we spent the night in Deer Lake. At least we managed to score an awesome Airbnb. Hey, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. A quick recap for day 6. We started in Howley at 9 a.m. and traveled 40 kilometers to the Gaff. Then we arrived back in Deer Lake at 7:30 that evening for a grand total of 10.5 hours and 115 kilometers or 72 miles. Our average moving speed was slow. Our maximum elevation was 1,801 feet, total climb was 2,126 feet, and our total descent was 2,296 feet. Thanks for watching part 2 of my Crossing Newfoundland by ATV series. Here's a preview of what you'll see in part 3.